Imagine a California you've never seen, before movie stars, before Silicon Valley, just endless farmland under a relentless sun. And in those fields worked men who had crossed oceans for a chance at a better life. They were Punjabi Sikh farmers from northern India, driven out by British colonial rule, crushing taxes on their land, and a future that offered them nothing back home. They arrived in California with empty pockets but rich traditions, believing that hard work here could build the dreams denied to them there. With no fancy kitchens and almost none of the spices they grew up with, they cooked around campfires using whatever they could afford: onions, lentils, corn, goat, rice, transforming American farm ingredients into food that tasted like hope. History rarely tells their stories, but their flavors changed California forever. Because before California became a dream for the world, these men were already living it, one humble meal at a time. Tonight, we're uncovering 25 real foods they actually ate in those farming camps. Recipes of struggle, spice, and survival you've never heard before. 1. Lentil stew with tortillas. Picture this: a dusty California sunset, the air thick with the smell of sweat, soil, and simmering lentils. In the early 1900s, Punjabi farm workers would gather around small tin pots after long days in the fields. They didn't have chapatis or basmati rice, just lentils, onions, and a few tortillas bought from their Mexican co-workers. And somehow, it worked. They called it dal. But out here, it became something else: lentil stew with tortillas. Simple, earthy, filling, a symbol of what survival looked like when tradition met necessity. The lentils boiled slow over a campfire until thick, rich, and spiced with whatever they could find. Maybe cumin, maybe just salt and hope. When you think of fusion food today, you imagine restaurants with fancy menus. But these men? They invented it out of hunger. Indian hands stirring American pots, tearing tortillas instead of chapatis. Proof that when you mix two struggles, you sometimes end up with something beautiful. And that's just the beginning. Because the next dish shows how Indian spice met Southern soul. In a bowl of chickpeas and cornbread. 2. Spiced chickpeas with cornbread. If the lentil stew was about blending survival, this next dish was about friendship: spiced chickpeas with cornbread. Out in the Central Valley, Indian and African American laborers often worked side by side. The fields were long, the pay was short, but at the end of the day, food brought them together. One man might bring chickpeas from a worn burlap sack, soaked overnight, boiled soft. Another would share cornbread baked in a tin over coals. And when the two met, magic. The chickpeas were cooked down with onions, chilies, and a touch of lard instead of ghee. Smoky, spicy, full of heart. The cornbread crumbled just enough to soak up every drop of that thick stew. It was comfort food without a name. Indian masala meets Southern hearth. These weren't chefs. They were field hands with calloused palms and proud hearts. But somehow, they created a dish that told both stories. One of Punjab's spice fields and Mississippi's plantations, meeting right there in the California dirt. And if you thought that was an unlikely fusion, wait till you hear how goat curry found its way into the mix, with a handful of wild herbs from the very fields they worked in. 3. Goat curry with wild herbs. There were no grocery stores in the farming camps, just fields, animals, and whatever you could trade. So when a worker managed to get a goat, it was a celebration. The men would gather around, knives in hand, firewood stacked high, and pots ready. A goat curry wasn't an everyday meal. It was a memory of home, reborn right there in the middle of California. They didn't have the usual Indian spices, but nature provided substitutes. Wild sage, mustard greens, and fennel from the fields added a strange, beautiful twist. Goat meat simmered low with onions, garlic, and crushed wild herbs, the air filling with a scent that turned that hard, dusty camp into something sacred. They'd eat it sitting on overturned buckets, tearing pieces of bread or tortilla to scoop the gravy. Nobody cared that it wasn't authentic. It was theirs, a mix of Punjab's fire and California's wilderness. For a few hours under the stars, they weren't just laborers. They were men sharing laughter, smoke, and stories that tasted like home. But their next creation was something humbler. A rice dish so simple, so clever, it could stretch one pot to feed 10 hungry workers. 4. Rice and pinto bean pilaf. In the camps, every grain mattered. Rice was precious, shipped in small burlap sacks from San Francisco's ports, expensive and rare. So the men learned to stretch it, one handful at a time. That's how rice and pinto bean pilaf was born, a clever blend of Indian comfort and California necessity. They'd fry onions in a dented tin pot, toss in a pinch of chili and cumin, spices saved from home, guarded like gold. Then came the pinto beans, soft and hearty, borrowed from Mexican neighbors. Finally, the rice, fragrant but scarce, cooked together until it's all merged into one humble, fragrant meal. When the lid lifted, steam carried the smell of a faraway Punjab mixed with the dry heat of the San Joaquin Valley. Each bite was soft, smoky, and filling, a taste that reminded them they could still create something whole, even with so little. And here's the hidden truth. This dish didn't just feed bellies. It united entire communities of workers who shared one pot, one spoon, one story. But wait till you hear what happened when they ran out of vegetables entirely and turned sour milk into something unforgettable. 5. Buttermilk curry with rice. When food supplies ran low, and they often did, the men in the camps turned to what they called kadi. It started as an accident. Milk gone sour, a few spoonfuls of gram flour, and a prayer that it would stretch far enough to fill everyone's tin plate. They whisked the buttermilk with flour, salt, and a bit of chili powder. Then poured it into a pot and let it simmer slowly. The sourness mellowed into something tangy, comforting, a taste that somehow brought back the kitchens of Punjab even under the California sun. Poured over a scoop of plain rice, it was simple but satisfying, light yet full of flavor. Workers said it felt like home in a bowl. A reminder that even spoiled milk could turn into something worth sharing. Around the fire, they'd pass the pot, dip their rice, and laugh about the day's back-breaking work. It was proof that resilience isn't about having enough. It's about making enough. But soon they'd crave something warm and solid to tear and share. A fried flatbread, topped with onions, sizzling on a cast iron pan. 6. Fried onion flatbread. There was something about the smell of onions hitting a hot pan that made even the toughest day feel a little softer. That's why fried onion flatbread became a camp favorite. It wasn't fancy, just a mix of cornmeal, wheat flour, and salt kneaded with calloused hands after hours of fieldwork. The men rolled it thin, sprinkled chopped onions on top, and laid it right over a smoking skillet. The edges crisped, the onions caramelized, and the air filled with a sweetness that could make a laborer forget his aching back. Some brushed it with tallow or butter if they had it. Most just ate it plain, hot off the fire. It wasn't just bread, it was connection. They'd tear off pieces, pass them around, and talk about the villages they left behind, the families they hoped to see again. Every bite was a bridge between two worlds, one made of memory, the other of survival. And when summer came, and corn was everywhere, they found a way to turn even the simplest ear into something bold. A smoky, roasted sweet corn with chili salt. 7. Roasted sweet corn with chili salt. By midsummer, California's fields were bursting with corn, golden, sweet, and everywhere. For the Indian workers, corn was more than food. It was fuel. They'd finish long shifts under the blazing sun, pull fresh ears from the stalks, and roast them right on open coals. The fire popped, the husks blackened, and the smell, smoky and sweet, rolled through the camp like hope. When the corn was done, they'd rub it with chili powder and salt, a trick learned from their Mexican friends. That first bite, pure magic. The heat of the chili, the sweetness of the corn, the crunch of charred kernels. It was California meeting India on a stick. It wasn't a feast, but it felt like one. Men laughed, traded stories, and passed ears around the fire. For a moment, the world didn't feel so heavy. This was survival disguised as joy, and every cob roasted in that fire carried a bit of both. But not every meal was light or easy. Some nights, when money ran out, they turned to the simplest of vegetables, cabbage and potatoes, and still found a way to make them taste like home. 8. Cabbage and potato stir fry. When pay was late, and it often was, the camps turned quiet. Men pooled what little they had left, and one of them would return from town with a head of cabbage and a few dusty potatoes. It wasn't much, but it was enough to build something warm. Cabbage and potato stir fry. They'd slice the cabbage thin, cube the potatoes small, and fry everything together in a dented iron pan with a spoon of tallow instead of oil. A pinch of cumin, maybe a bit of black pepper if someone still had some in his tin. That was all it needed. The scent was sharp, earthy, and familiar. The smell of home kitchens half a world away. When it hit the plate, it wasn't just food. It was defiance. Even in a foreign land, even when their pockets were empty, these men refused to eat without flavor. They sat shoulder to shoulder, eating from one pan, silent except for the sound of steel spoons scraping the bottom. And yet, from these scraps, something even more comforting was born. A soft, spiced porridge that became the ultimate one-pot meal on cold valley nights. 9. Spiced lentil porridge. When the nights turned cold and the fog rolled in from the valley, the camps grew quiet. Fires flickered low, and the men craved something soft, something that warmed the stomach and the soul. That's when they made masala khichdi, a spiced lentil porridge that could cure hunger, homesickness, and exhaustion all at once. They'd toss rice and lentils into a single pot, pour in water, and let it bubble until everything melted together. A dash of turmeric for color, a little chili for kick, maybe a fried onion if they were lucky. The smell alone could pull tired men out of their bunks. Khichdi didn't need much, just patience and a little heart. It was creamy, golden, and easy to share. Everyone dipped in with tin bowls, grateful for the warmth and the faint echo of Punjab in every spoonful. It wasn't just a meal. It was medicine for the spirit. But sometimes, comfort had to wait. Because when the men got their hands on a chicken, rare as payday, dinner turned into an event. A simmering stewed chicken with onions and chilies. 10. Stewed chicken with onions and chilies. When a chicken made its way into the camps, it was like striking gold. Maybe a farmer traded it. Maybe someone saved up enough from their weekly pay. Either way, it meant a feast. The men would gather around the fire, the scent of wood smoke and spice filling the cool night air. That's when they made stewed chicken with onions and chilies. They didn't have fancy curry pastes or spice racks, just instinct and memory. They'd brown the chicken in tallow until the skin crisped, toss in onions, crushed chilies, and a splash of water to make a thin, fiery broth. The meat simmered for hours, tender and rich, soaking up every bit of flavor the campfire could offer. When it was finally ready, they ate straight from the pot. No plates, no fuss. Just torn flatbread or rice dipped into that smoky, spicy stew that burned a little but healed a lot. It was more than a meal. It was victory. Proof that even far from home, they could still taste pride. And when the fields froze and roots were all that grew, they turned humble vegetables into something bold. Curried turnips and carrots. 11. Curried turnips and carrots. When winter swept across the valley, the fields emptied, and so did the men's pockets. Fresh produce vanished, except for hardy roots, turnips and carrots. From those came curried turnips and carrots, a dish that turned scarcity into comfort. They diced the vegetables, tossed them into a pan with tallow, garlic, and a bit of cumin. The fire hissed, the air filled with an earthy sweetness, and the stew thickened into a golden spiced glaze. Each bite carried warmth, not from the heat, but from the memory of meals once shared back home. It wasn't luxury. It was survival, wrapped in flavor. And in those quiet, smoky camps, even the simplest roots reminded them that food could still bring dignity and a reason to gather. When grain ran short again, they didn't give up. They reinvented bread itself, creating the humble cornmeal chapati. 12. Cornmeal chapati. Wheat was precious in the camps, too expensive, too rare. So the men looked to what was around them, cornmeal from nearby mills. That's how cornmeal chapati was born, dense, golden, and built for endurance. They mixed cornmeal with a bit of wheat flour if they had it, added warm water, and shaped rough, thick rounds by hand. When slapped onto a hot pan, the dough crackled and puffed, giving off the faint, nutty smell of roasted grain. It wasn't soft like home-style chapatis, but it lasted. These flatbreads could be carried into the fields, eaten cold at noon, or dipped into lentils at night. Every bite tasted like persistence, dry, sturdy, and real. The men joked that it chewed back, but they ate it proudly. Because in every hard crust was proof. They could adapt and still hold on to tradition. Next came spicy pinto bean soup, their American-style dal. 13. Spicy pinto bean soup. When lentils ran out, the men found their American cousin, the pinto bean. Cheap, hearty, and easy to find, it became the heart of their spicy pinto bean soup. They'd boil the beans for hours until soft, then toss in chopped onions, crushed chilies, and a pinch of mustard seed saved from home. The broth turned thick and smoky, bubbling gently in dented tin pots set right on the coals. It wasn't quite dal, but close enough to fool the heart. The first spoonful carried warmth and spice, the kind that made tired hands steady again. They shared it in circles, eating straight from the pot, passing tin cups between friends. This soup became their rhythm, cheap, sustaining, and full of flavor. that didn't care where you came from. And on good days, when a few eggplants showed up, they'd fry them crisp. Fried eggplant slices. 14. Fried eggplant slices. When someone brought back a few eggplants from the market, it felt like a gift. The men didn't waste a single piece. They sliced them thin, dusted with flour and salt, and dropped them into sizzling tallow. Fried eggplant slices were born, golden, crisp, and gone in minutes. The edges curled and browned, the centers turned soft and smoky. They reminded the men of pakoras from Punjab, simple street food that carried laughter and spice. Here, it was different, but still beautiful. They'd sit around the fire, crunching on those slices, dipping them in whatever stew or chutney was left from the day before. It was comfort disguised as a side dish, proof that even one eggplant could feed 10 spirits. And when tomatoes ripened in the fields, they used them next, turning the harvest into curry-spiced stewed tomatoes. 15. Curry-spiced stewed tomatoes. When tomato season hit the Central Valley, the camps turned red, crates of overripe fruit sold cheap by the truckload. The men bought them by the bucket, knowing exactly what to do. Make curry-spiced stewed tomatoes. They'd slice the tomatoes, toss them into a pot with onions, cumin, and a bit of chili. The fire worked its magic, bubbling away the sourness until it turned rich and velvety. The smell drifted through the fields, part Indian curry, part California sunshine. Poured over rice or eaten with flatbread, it was both sweet and sharp, a perfect balance that reminded them of simpler days back home. Even the American workers would wander over, drawn by the smell, asking for just a taste. It wasn't fancy, but it was flavor that refused to be forgotten. And when nothing was left but bones, they made broth, goat bone broth with rice. 16. Goat bone broth with rice. When meat ran out, the bones stayed behind. And in those bones, there was still life. The men knew it. They'd rinse the goat bones, toss them into a blackened pot, and let them simmer all day. That's how goat bone broth with rice became a camp tradition. The fire crackled low, the broth turned cloudy with fat, and the smell drifted through the fields like a promise. They'd season it with onions, salt, maybe a pinch of pepper if someone had traded for it. When the rice went in, it soaked up everything: marrow, smoke, and patience. It wasn't rich, but it was real. One pot could feed a dozen hungry men and still leave enough for breakfast. Each bowl was a reminder that waste was a luxury they couldn't afford, and gratitude was something they could still taste. Next came a fiery side, roasted chili and onion relish. 17. Roasted chili and onion relish. Some nights, when dinner was plain rice or dry bread, the men made fire in a different way: roasted chili and onion relish. It was the flavor that woke everything up. They'd toss whole onions and chilies right into the flames, turning them until the skins blackened and blistered. Then, using the back of a tin cup, they'd crush them together with salt and a drop of oil. The result was smoky, sharp, and alive, a taste that hit the tongue like lightning. They'd spread it over flatbread, mix it into beans, or just eat it straight with rice when there was nothing else left. The heat made their eyes water, but nobody minded. It was the taste of power in small doses, and when the sun scorched the valley dry, they turned to something cool and soothing: the salty, spiced buttermilk drink, lassi. 18. Salted buttermilk drink. Under the burning California sun, water alone wasn't enough. The men needed something that cooled the body and reminded them of home. That's when they made salted buttermilk drink, or what they called lassi. They'd churn leftover milk until it split, mix the thin buttermilk with water, salt, and a pinch of cumin. Sometimes they added crushed mint if the fields had any growing wild. Poured into tin cups, it was tangy, cold, and alive with flavor. The kind of drink that brought a sigh of relief after 12 hours in the fields. It wasn't sweet like the lassi from India. It was tough, practical, built for survival. Every sip washed away dust, sweat, and homesickness all at once. And after cooling off, they'd turn back to something hearty and fried. Potato patties with lentils, the closest thing to comfort food they had. 19. Fried potato patties with lentils. Some evenings, when they wanted something that felt like a real meal, the men made fried potato patties with lentils. It started with leftover lentils from the night before, thick, spiced, and too precious to waste. They'd mash boiled potatoes, mix in the lentils, form rough patties, and fry them in shallow tallow until golden brown. The edges turned crisp, the centers soft and rich. The first bite carried smoke, spice, and comfort, like an echo of street snacks back in Punjab. Around the fire, the men ate them hot, sometimes dipping them into chili relish or wrapping them in tortillas. They laughed more on those nights, maybe because it felt like a feast, maybe because it reminded them of being young and carefree again. But when fall arrived, a new harvest brought an unexpected pairing: goat and pumpkin stew. 20. Goat and pumpkin stew. When autumn rolled in, pumpkins piled up across the valley, cheap, plentiful, and bright against the dry earth. The men turned them into something special: goat and pumpkin stew. If they were lucky enough to get a bit of goat meat, they'd cube it small and brown it with garlic and chili. Then came chunks of pumpkin, softening in the pot, soaking up the spice and smoke. As it simmered, the sweet pumpkin melted into the savory broth, thickening it into something that tasted far richer than it really was. They ate it slowly, letting the warmth chase away the chill of the cold fields. The mix of tender meat and sweet pumpkin was strange but perfect. India meeting California in one pot. It was hearty, humble, and gone fast. And when meat ran out again, they made do with what they knew best. Chickpea flour dumplings in broth. 21. Chickpea flour dumplings in broth. On nights when meat was a memory, the men turned to creativity. Chickpea flour dumplings in broth. It was poor man's comfort food, born from necessity and patience. They'd mix chickpea flour with water, salt, and a pinch of chili, shaping the dough into small dumplings with their rough, calloused hands. Each one dropped into a bubbling pot of spiced broth, thin but full of flavor from onions, garlic, and a touch of turmeric. The dumplings puffed up, soft yet hearty, soaking in every bit of that golden soup. It wasn't much to look at, but it filled the belly and quieted hunger after a long day in the fields. Around the fire, spoons clinked, laughter rose, and for a moment, the camp felt like family again. And on rare holidays, they allowed themselves a sweet escape. Boiled rice with milk and sugar. 22. Boiled rice with milk and sugar. Sweetness was rare in the camps, saved for holidays or paydays. But when it came, it tasted like home. Boiled rice with milk and sugar was their celebration dish, simple, creamy, and full of memory. They'd boil rice slowly in water until soft, then pour in milk, sometimes fresh, sometimes canned, and stir until it thickened. a handful of sugar, maybe a few crushed cardamom seeds if someone had them tucked away from India. The pot filled with a warm, milky aroma that made the camp feel less like a work site and more like a kitchen again. They'd eat it straight from the pot, smiling like kids, the sweetness cutting through months of salt and spice. For a few spoonfuls, life didn't feel so hard, but sweetness fades fast, and on rare, happy days, when they had a little extra flour and oil, they fried up puri-style rounds. Crispy memories of home. 25. Fried dough snacks. When the work week ended and spirits ran high, the men treated themselves. Fried dough snacks, little puri-style rounds that crackled in the pan. They mixed rough flour with water and salt, kneading it until smooth, then rolled it into small discs and dropped them into hot oil. The dough puffed instantly, golden and crisp, filling the air with the smell of home. Everyone crowded around the fire, laughing as they flipped the puris and watched them balloon. Some sprinkled them with salt, others dipped them into leftover curry or sweetened milk if they could spare the sugar. It wasn't just food. It was joy you could taste. A reminder that even in hardship, they still knew how to celebrate. And as the night quieted, the fire faded, and the stars blinked over the valley, those warm, crispy rounds tasted like victory. Small, simple, and unforgettable. When we think of California's history, we picture gold miners, farmers, and dreamers. But hidden between those rows of crops were men who carried a different kind of treasure. Recipes born from struggle, hope, and memory. These Indian immigrants didn't just plant fields, they planted flavors. Their food told stories of loneliness softened by spice, of hunger turned into invention, of cultures quietly blending over fire and friendship. Each pot of stew, each fried bread, each sip of salted lassi whispered the same truth. Survival can still taste like home. Their legacy lives on. In every bite of curry rice, every tortilla dipped in spice, every shared meal that bridges worlds. They built more than farms. They built belonging.